Hello. Today's lesson is Intro to Java. Starting off, we have the 5 main data types that we're going to use when we're programming in Java. The first two are int and double. Int means integer, so a number that doesn't have anything after the decimal point. And then a double is the same thing as an integer, except you can have decimals, so you can do more with them. Then you have booleans. Those can only have two values, either true or false. The default is false, and that's all they can do. There's two values. Then you have char. Char is another primitive that can hold any one character or any one symbol. The thing about this is that it can only hold one character. You can't put two characters in a char. But with a string, which is not a primitive, you should note, that holds multiple characters in a list. And that allows you to have a whole word or a sentence. Next thing is conditionals. Conditionals are pretty self-explanatory. You just have if and then some Boolean expression. So this is going to end up being either true or false, depending on what A and B are. And if that's true, if that ends up returning true, it's going to do whatever's in between the brackets of the if statement. Otherwise, it's going to keep going, and since there's an else statement, it'll do this instead. You can also not have the else. You can just not have the else, and it'll just do whatever's next. But the else allows you to have like a second option. The else if thing on the right is basically the way you can string together a bunch of if statements to happen in a row. So for example, we have if a greater than b, then we're going to do this. Otherwise, check if this is true, and if it is, do that. And if neither of them are true, then we're just going to do the third thing. And it's going, if you can keep chaining these together, and it'll check from top to bottom. The first one that's true is the one that's going to run, and it's not going to run any of the other ones when you do else if chains. Next thing is for loops and while loops as well. Rather than copying code over and over again, we can group code into what's called a for loop. A for loop has 4 parts to it. The first part is this int I equals 0 part. That's, you can have whatever you want in there, really. You just need to initialize a variable in there. And that's our initialization step. That's what we use to keep track of the for loop. Next part is the condition. This has to be true in order for the loop to run. Similar to an if statement. It's not going to run if this is false. And then the third thing is the increment. It's when we change this this variable that we have so that at some point it's going to stop. If you forget to put your increment in, or you put your increment in incorrectly, you might end up with an infinite loop, and that's like bad. The last thing is the code, the actual body of the for loop. When you do this, this is just going to happen every time the loop runs. So in this case, it's going to say I equals 0. Okay, 0 is less than 10, so run it. Add 1 to it. Okay, 1 is less than 10, run it. Add 1 to it. 2 is less than 10. And it's going to keep going all the way until we have 9. Add 1 to 9. 10 is not less than 10, so it's going to go to whatever the next line is and skip this body. Next thing is while loops. While loops are similar to for loops in that they basically just do the same thing. They loop over code. While loop only has 2 parts, the condition and the body. So a while loop simply, okay, check. Is this true? If it is, do what's in the body, and then check again. If it's true, do what's in the body, and it's going to keep doing that until the condition is false. If the condition is false the first time you check, then it's just not going to run at all, just like a for loop, just like an if statement, not a for loop. One thing you have to note about this is you have to, if you're trying to use a while loop like a for loop where you have your like incrementer, you need to initialize your incrementer outside of the while loop, because if you did it inside, it would reset the number to 0 every time, and you would get an infinite loop. So you want to initialize it up here outside of the while loop, and then use it in the condition. And then you have to make sure that you increment inside the body, because if you forget to do that, I will just stay at 0, and you're going to infinitely loop, and that's bad. Alright, next thing is strings and string methods. Strings are special. They are not a primitive data type. You might have noticed that they were capitalized in the data types section. That's because they're a class, and we're going to talk about classes later on. But what you should know now is that because string is a class, we can call methods from it. So these are some of the useful methods. The most useful ones here are in bold: the dot length, dot substring, and dot equals. They all do essentially what you would expect them to do. The dot length just returns the number of characters in the string. So you can do, like, if you have string A equals hello world, a dot length is going to return however many characters are in hello world. I don't know off the top of my head. I'm going to skip dot substring and go to dot equals. Dot equals is how you compare two strings. You would think that you could just do, double equal sign and put two strings on either end, but you can't actually do that because you can't actually just compare objects like that. It's weird. Because it actually isn't comparing the values of the objects. It's just comparing where their memory addresses are. But you don't have to worry about that yet. We'll worry about that later. Instead, just use the dot equals method. So what you do is you put whatever string you're comparing on the left side of the equal sign. You do dot equals, and then you put inside of the brackets, inside of the parentheses, whatever the string on the right would be. And that's going to actually compare the characters in the string and return the correct answer, either true or false. Dot substring is, what it allows you to do is you pick a start index and you pick an end index. By default, the end index is the end of the string. And what it does is it returns only the part of the string that you select. So in hello world, the H is at index 0, and the exclamation mark at the end is at the length -1, right? So if you did substring 2, 4, you would get whatever the third letter is in hello world, which is L, and you'd get L-O-W. No, you just get L-O, and then you wouldn't get the W because it doesn't include the final part. So if you did substring 2, 4, you'd get L-O. Just those middle characters in the form of a string, in the form of a 2-character string. Arrays are the last thing we're going to talk about. An array is a non-resizable list that can only contain one data type. So you can have either ints or strings or doubles or booleans. You can't have multiple different things at once in an array. That might seem restrictive, but that's just how arrays work. For example, you can have an array that holds 5 ints like this. These are the indices of the array at the bottom, and these are the actual values of the elements at the top. Notice that it's a 5-element array, right? The length is 5. The first index is 0, and the last index is equal to the length -1. 5 minus 1 is 4. This is important to know. being able to use indices, the useful skill. So this array holds, 15 and 48 are the elements at 0 and 1. So if I ask you the element at 3, that's going to be 89. So you use the indices like locations, or like an address of your house is like I'm on whatever, like 17 Drive Street, right? These indices are like that. So I could say who lives at index 4, 7 does. Next thing is, how do I actually create an array? We can create an array when we know the data type that we're using and the size of the array that we're creating. So the way we format it is we say the data type, brackets, and then the name of our array. That's the initialization. Equals, we have to use this keyword new, which I'll talk about in a moment, and then the data type again, and brackets again, and this time we put the size inside of those brackets. Now, the new word here is basically telling the computer, hey, I'm making a new thing in memory, right? So it's going to initialize a new array with 5 integers, and it's going to set them all equal to 0 when I say new int 5. And then it's going to dump, it's going to basically give this variable the address of that array, and that's how it sets it up. The next thing, how do we actually use the array? The way we can access values in an array is we just type the name and then brackets the index. So in this case, if we made an array of size 2 and then we said array at 0 equals 2, array at 1 equals 9, it would end up looking like this. So you have 0 and 1 as the indices, and the values are 2 and 9, just like we put in. Now, we can not only can we put numbers into the array, we can also take numbers out of the array. We can say int x equals whatever's that array at 1. And in this case, if we look at array at 1, it's equal to 9, x equals 9. That's how it works, basically. Here are the exercises for the review lesson. The first one, this one's the easiest one. Write a program that creates an array with the numbers 1 through 50 using a loop. So one hint I would give here is to use your incrementer on your for loop. You can actually use that as an index. This part this is probably the hardest of the 3 exercises. We'll talk about that at the end. The second one I want you to do is write a program that finds the average of the numbers in an array. One hint I'll give is that you need to have something, you need to make a variable before the loop starts, and that needs to be keeping track, because the average is sum divided by the number of things. So you need to keep track of the sum by making something before the loop and adding to it inside the loop. And then the last one you should do is write a program that finds the maximum number in an int array. Now this one's complicated, well, the most complicated compared to the other two. Basically, in order to find the maximum number, you're going to have to compare. You're going to have to set one number, so you're going to have to pick a number to be the maximum number, right? Like the first element. And then you're going to have to loop through the array and compare the maximum you've chosen to the one that it's currently looking at in the loop. And you're going to want to make sure it stays the biggest, right? So you're going to need to have some kind of comparison in your for loop. And if the maximum that you're storing currently is smaller than another element, you're going to want to set that element as the maximum instead. And then if you do that through the whole loop, through the whole array, if you iterate through the whole array, you should at the end have the maximum number stored in that variable you started with. Alright, that is it.